Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Manu Prasanna. I'm a conversational AI strategist here at Avaamo. I come from a technology and cloud background. I was at VMware at the Cloud Management Business Unit, where I managed VMware's next generation cloud management suite of products, which included cloud automation, operations, and business management products. Before I dive into today's topic, just a quick word about Avaamo. Avaamo is a 6-year-old conversational AI company. Not many people knew what conversational AI was in 2014 when we started. We have a world-class set of investors, a world-class team comprised of Silicon Valley veterans. We're based out of Los Altos in California. We count amongst our customers some of the biggest names in the world. Many of them are household names that you might all recognize. What we're talking today, or what we're talking about, is something that we're very experienced with. We resolve close to 9 million tickets in a year. We reduce the number of tickets in our customer organizations by 44%. So what that means is those tickets were never created. I'll be diving more into that shortly. We also brought to life close to 10 million documents. The other thing about us is employees love us. Conversational AI is a delightful experience and adoption rates go up fast when it's deployed. We've seen companies where only 20% of the employees came to the self-service portal, but once they implemented conversational AI, that employee adoption went up to 80%. So what's the problem with ITSM? Many of you industry leaders already know this. The answer to most questions already lies in a document somewhere in your company. It's just lost in some SharePoint drive or Google Drive or Box or Dropbox folder. It's just too hard to find. So what does the employee do? They go and file a ticket. This leads to another problem. It's not about ticket creation, it's about issue resolution. Today's ITSM tools make it about ticket creation, filing tickets, defining a beautiful process to file a ticket, making ticket filing easier, and creating tickets easier. Ask yourself, do you really want more tickets? We focus on issue resolution. The third problem is, who's the real person to benefit? Today's ITSM tools are agent focused. I'm sorry, but this has to be your employee. They need to come first. So how does Avaamo do it? We bring your documents to life. We index all your documents and create a knowledge graph. So when you ask your virtual assistants a question, they give you the exact answer instantly. We focus on issue resolution. Remember I told you we reduced the number of tickets for our customers by 44%. We also help resolve incidents that turn into tickets, resolve them faster, and more on that in a little bit. The other thing we do is we are where your employees are. We meet them in the channels that they already use. We don't need them to change how they do things at all. I've talked about all of this in a previous webinar titled 5 Proven Ways to Resolve IT Support Tickets Faster. I encourage you to check it out on the Avaamo website. It's available as an on-demand webinar. If you watch that webinar, you will see how we approach the ITSM problem. But you might still ask, these seem like simple things. Why can't any vendor do this? Well, at this point, let me point you to some breaking news. The Forrester New Wave report for chatbots for IT operations just released. This is the Q4 2020 Forrester New Wave report. If you're wondering where Avaamo is, you need to look on the very top right. We are the leader in this space. You can go to our website and download the full Forrester New Wave report. It gives you all the reasons why we are the leader. But we can let you in on some of the secret sauce in this webinar. And to do that, I'm going to bring someone else who can not just tell you, but also show you why. Now I'm going to invite my colleague Abhi. He's our resident AI expert. He's going to talk about why NLU for IT support is hard and how, in addressing those, Avaamo has come up with the best NLU in the business. So let's take a look. Abhi, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Manu, for passing over the presenter controls. By way of introduction, my background is in neuroscience and machine learning as well. So I'm kind of fascinated with the world of artificial intelligence as well as human behavior. And so conversational AI really fits the bill in terms of the work that we do at Avaamo and kind of my background as well. So I'm looking forward to talking today about how it is that Avaamo has created kind of an intelligent system here and how we might think about constructiveness from the ground up and what it means in the context of ITSM as well. So with that, let's kind of jump right in. By way of an agenda for today, we're going to talk about kind of the goals of a system that's going to be that we're going to be attempting to create here. It's essentially going to try and understand user input in the context of ITSM, and we want to create something that can understand natural language and is, of course, at the end of the day, a useful virtual assistant, right, for employees to use in the process of automating kind of mundane tasks and to ease the burden on service kind of support agents, whether they're L1, L2, L3 support agents. We want to build a virtual assistant that can essentially handle these tasks for them. So that's going to be the goal of the system. We'll then go into kind of the challenges that such a system experiences. We'll talk about a little bit of the kind of the breakthrough technologies that, just more generally in the industry, as well as how Avaamo has kind of, put our own spin on this. The method then that gets applied to the way that we build virtual assistants and build deep learning models. And then finally, we'll take a look at kind of a live example of what are the outcomes of such an approach, right? How do we end up constructing a system that can help automate ticket resolution in the ITSM context, but largely kind of at a higher level, being able to understand natural language precisely, right, and providing precise answers to people's questions and kind of automating their use cases as well as we can. So let's jump right in. We'll talk about the goals of a system, right? Typically, most organizations that are in conversational AI, right, they'll be able to do one or two use cases. They'll focus on a particular industry, for example. The unique thing about Avaamo is that we kind of play in many different industries, right? And this ends up being a strength since we can learn across different industry verticals. But so this is really the spread of different kind of vendors and companies and approaches to artificial intelligence in natural language understanding that we'll see. We'll either be able to tackle a use case in one language, or we can increase the number of languages, or we can increase the number of use cases, and then ultimately the goal is to really get to this place where we're able to do many different use cases easily and deal with many languages. The big issue, of course, as we'll see in a second, is data, right? How do we get the data to be able to do, provide accurate and robust responses, even in the case where there's a lot of different use cases to handle, as is the case in ITSM, and then of course many different languages. Employees will be spread out across the world. So how do we create a system that can tackle kind of all these different constraints? So to kind of root this in kind of a more realistic example, let's take a look at kind of a use case, right? Maybe we're checking the status of a ticket, we're checking the status of a claim, right? Obviously this is a use case, and we can kind of go horizontally and spread it out across many different languages. That's one way to increase the intelligence and capacity of the system. The other approach is to go vertically, right, and increase more and more use cases, right? I need to reset my password. How do I set up my VPN? I need to, have a question about Microsoft 365, Outlook, for example, or Excel, right? Being able to tackle more and more use cases within the same vertical is another way to kind of expand out the kind of sophistication and level of involvement that we can have our virtual assistant take place within the ITSM context. Now, of course, with these new use cases, right, the holy grail is now we also need to be able to access these use cases in many different languages. And this is really the secret sauce and also the challenge, the great challenge of building a system that's able to do things in many different languages and, of course, across many different use cases. And that's the goal, right? And this is where we find Avaamo has kind of found itself after many, many years of working with hundreds of different organizations with hundreds of thousands of employees, multinational corporations. And after having worked with these large organizations, we've kind of been able to distill our understanding. And that's kind of what we'll go through today is how is it that we can build a system that allows us to tackle many use cases in many languages, kind of in one natural language understanding engine, right? Okay. Now, the approach to doing this, right, involves a couple of pieces, but the fundamental equation is going to be as follows, right? We're going to need data to feed into a system. Whenever you're building an intelligent learning system, we're going to need a lot of data. We're going to need an algorithm, right, something that can understand what data is coming in, and then, of course, the combination of which will provide us with some measure of predictive capacity and accuracy in handling a use case, right? And what happens is most organizations will focus on the data, right? They'll try to capture more and more data for specific ITSM use cases. For example, if you're trying to reset your password, right, we'll try to get a lot of training data to try to handle the kind of the vast volumes of different ways in which people can speak, different ways in which the sentences can be confusing. That can be resolved by getting more and more exposure to training data. So that's one approach that a lot of vendors will take. But unfortunately, organizations don't always have access to this data. They might not be able to share this information, and it's sometimes it's proprietary. And then the other thing is, if you have many different use cases that we want to tackle, even in the context of ITSM, right? We want to be able to support provisioning hardware, provisioning software. We want to be able to make sure we can assign people to the sales group or to different departments. And then, of course, resetting passwords for various different applications. Each of these use cases will in and of themselves require a lot of data, and that kind of spread is not always available. And so that's kind of a problem with going the data route, is we end up with sparse data, which of course then leads to low accuracy systems because the algorithm is not able to understand and detect patterns when we don't have that much data, right? So many organizations will struggle at this stage, and they'll come up with crowdsourcing or they'll try to solve the data problem. Now, Avaamo, right, by way of kind of our approach to solving this problem, we took a different tack, right? Instead of focusing on data, we instead focus on the algorithm, right? How do we make a smarter algorithm that, regardless of the amount of data that's available, can still get more insights and be kind of robust, right? And this is the key to building kind of a robust NLU system, is to be able to build a smarter, more intelligent algorithm. And that's the approach that we've taken. It's harder, right, of course, to go down this path. Getting data is kind of the easier. We obviously need a lot of data for systems to have high accuracy, but there's a path to getting data, right? Building a smarter algorithm requires a little more nuance and is a more challenging approach. And it is, in fact, the approach that Avaamo has taken, and that's kind of led us down a different path than most vendors you'll find out there. And the way that we build kind of a smarter algorithm, right, is by creating what's known as a better learning objective. We make our algorithms learn from the data in kind of a slightly different way, and we'll show you that in a second. We train from millions and millions of different resolved IT tickets, so we do play in the data space as well. And Avaamo has a huge repository, right, of resolved IT tickets globally, and using that, we're able to train our system to be very, very smart and fine-tune our algorithm. And then finally, this is kind of the key insight and breakthrough that Avaamo has been able to achieve is over the past 5-7 years, we've developed a number of patents in the space of sparse data analysis. So what that means is, even in the case where we don't have enough data for a particular use case, where we don't have enough data for a particular set of concepts that we want the virtual assistant to understand, the system will still be robust, right? And will still be able to extract insights. That's because, again, we have a better learning objective, and as we'll see, because of several breakthroughs in kind of technology that we've been able to leverage in natural language understanding. And what this ultimately allows us to do is create systems that are very accurate, right? An incredible amount of accuracy, even in the situation where there's not enough data. So that's useful, in its own right. But the outcome of this is that we're able to rapidly onboard new use cases. So let's say we engage with a customer, let's say we engage with an organization, and we're trying to build out a virtual assistant for them. Every new use case, right, whether it's trying to reset a password, whether it's trying to provision hardware, provision software, every new use case either will already have built out a pre-built set of training data for that, and our algorithm already kind of understands the ITSM language, to be able to tackle those use cases. And if we don't, then we can rapidly onboard those use cases. And additionally, our approach to being able to do natural language understanding and training and building learning algorithms using this kind of sparse data analysis method allows us to onboard languages as well, even in data sparse languages that are kind of more rare, right? The top 5 to 10 languages that people speak across the world will have a lot of training data, but the ones that employees may speak but which don't have a lot of training data, it becomes harder for a system to kind of tackle those languages. And with this approach that kind of we're talking about today, where we deal with sparse data and build a better algorithm to extract more insight, making it work harder, right, for a smaller data set, and then ultimately be able to get a higher accuracy, that allows us to onboard new languages very rapidly as well. So how is it that we're able to do this, right? So let's dig a little bit into the methodology, and then we'll close out by talking about kind of the approach here in terms of a demo and see kind of a live example of how this looks like in Avaamo's product. Now, without getting into too much kind of the weeds, there's really two approaches, right? One is building what's known as a masked language model, and the other is working with encoders, specifically bidirectional encoders. Now, again, without kind of digging too deeply into the weeds here, what we're doing is in this approach of this fundamental equation where we have data and we have an algorithm that can understand information from that data set and kind of generate predictions and understand patterns, ultimately to be able to have a high accuracy in some use case. What we've done is we create a better learning objective that forces the algorithm to do something, that forces the task of learning from data sets more challenging. So in this approach, we actually hide pieces of the training data from the algorithm so that it has to work harder, right, to predict what pieces of the input sentence are missing. And in doing so, we make the algorithm work harder. And so our AI system is then trained to be able to make more from less, right? It's able to extract more information from smaller data sets and indeed in sparse data kind of contexts. And the outcome of this, as we'll see, is a system that can do a number of things, right? We can generate precise answers from kind of a knowledge base, precise answers from questions that people may have. We can provide support for natural language in that people can ask the same sentence in multiple different ways. We're able to kind of support the many different kind of nuances in human speech and human language through this single system. We're able to disambiguate confusing things. So for example, if a user asks for something and there's multiple different responses, we're able to narrow down the scope and the scale of the response and get the user to the right response because we understand the context of what they're saying using our advanced algorithms as we've just seen. We can tackle various different ways of typing or talking, right? Short forms, keywords, phrases, and then of course we're able to extract the signal from the noise by dealing with long sentences. So what this allows us to do, right? So in this first use case, we're looking at precise answers. As we'll see in a second, our system is able to actually highlight the response. So if you have a question, right, what is the max file size I can send via Outlook? Because of the way that our algorithms are constructed and because of the way that we handle natural language understanding, we're able to actually pull out the exact answer, right, and serve that up to the user kind of as a summary, and then actually highlight where the response might be from some backend knowledge base, right? And the way to think about this is going to be hooking into your knowledge base, whether that's in ServiceNow, whether that's in Office 365, SharePoint, right? URLs, PDFs, documents of any kind of sort. We can ingest those and automatically be able to then provide answers, precise answers to those sections within that are relevant to the user's question. And of course, as I mentioned, people can ask a question in multiple different ways, right? And so the system is now robust to variation, right? Again, because our system is trained in sparse data analysis, what it essentially is able to do is to pull out the core kernel of the meaning of a sentence, the semantic meaning of a sentence, even when there's varying words, even when there's various ways of saying the same thing, right? And so that's kind of a critical component of how to build a system that is robust to fluctuation in user input. And then, of course, as we mentioned, disambiguation is a big piece, right? If a user asks a question that has multiple different paths that the virtual assistant can then take, being able to narrow down the confusing pieces, being able to get the user to the right section, the right answer within the set of conversation flows that we've built, or within the set of documents that they might want to be able to access, right? Narrowing down the right answer, that's kind of possible now because we understand and anticipate what the user is going to want, based on their question. This, of course, also allows us, as we mentioned, to tackle the case where people don't say a lot, right? Because of our sparse data patterns, we can actually extrapolate out further than other systems. So even if all we get is or 3-word sentence or phrase from the user, we can actually still narrow down and anticipate and predict what the user is going to want, and be able to get, kind of using that goal-driven behavior, be able to get them to the right answer from kind of a document source. And then the opposite end of that spectrum, right, is if there are very long sentences, right, that sometimes people will provide a lot of context when they have a question, and especially in the ITSM context, right, there's a lot of kind of red herrings when users speak with a system, or they interact with, or they're filing a ticket, right? There's a lot of extra information that they might provide where we only care about kind of the kernel, right? What is the most important, most salient piece? What's the signal in the noise? So for example, if a user says, I'm struggling with the max function in Excel, right, and there's a spelling mistake in there as well, how do I use it, right? The key thing that they want is the max function, and they kind of want a definition of that, right? So we're able to now serve that up, right, to the user, because we understand what is the most important piece of the puzzle, in addition to the other context that they might be providing as well. So this is kind of an overview of what it looks like if we were to build a system, from scratch, to be able to handle natural language understanding. And again, the key natural language understanding in the context of ITSM. And again, the key equation that we have to come back to, right, is this one, where it's data plus algorithm leads to better accuracy. And the key insight that I think Avaamo has had over the past several years, working with many different organizations, is that it's okay to focus on data, right? But once you've gotten the data, and even in the case where we don't have data, right, where there's sparse data environments, it really is important to focus on how we train the algorithm in creating a robust approach to then having high accuracy in handling many different use cases across many different languages as well, right? And so what this allows us to do now, kind of at the end of the day, is using this one system, we can rapidly onboard lots of different use cases when we work with a new organization. We can then also rapidly onboard new languages, right? And of course, right, the next big question is how much of this is available kind of out of the box with Avaamo, and that's a really good question. And the answer is, because we've been working at this for some time now, and because of these kind of breakthroughs that we've talked about today, we've actually, every time we engage with a new use case, we make it atomic, we make it modular, and we actually build it into the platform. So a lot of the typical ITSM use cases that we might encounter, 80, 90% of what you might see in the wild, we probably already have a built-in use case for that, right? And that includes three things, right? It includes the understanding, to be able to understand what are users going to say to trigger that use case. What are the different ways they'll say they want to reset their password? What are the different applications they'll want to reset their password for, whether it's Office 360, whether it's Outlook, whether it's Skype, right? Different applications, kind of all of that base understanding is already there kind of in the platform. And then of course we've interacted, in many, many different languages now. Avaamo can tackle 80 plus different languages out of the box, and then we're in production now. I think last count in 29 different more than 29 different languages across the world. And so that's kind of a testament to how the scope of the platform, and really, as we've seen today, it's possible because of our approach to focusing on making smarter algorithms. And ultimately that comes down to creating a smarter learning objective, forcing the algorithm to work harder to learn from less data, right? So we've seen how this works. Now let's take a look at what the kind of the end product is going to look like. So we'll actually do a quick demo now, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. I'm sure there's a few. So what we're looking at now is a virtual assistant that is kind of it's able to answer questions from a knowledge base. So one of there's two typical pieces, right, in ITSM that we care about. One is, how can I kind of resolve an employee's question if it exists in a knowledge base? How can I better give them access to that resource? And if they have a question, can I intelligently surface up, kind of the right context? And another way to kind of think about this is cognitive search, right? Enterprise cognitive search. So that's what we'll see kind of in this kind of demo. The other approach, which we'll not tackle today, is going to be kind of more multi-turn conversations where we're automating end-to-end kind of ticket resolution or IT incident resolution, right? And this is where we'll actually integrate into a backend solution, whether that's ServiceNow, or BMC, and be able to actually provide the resolution to an issue. So if someone is looking to provision hardware, we'll actually go ahead and get them the right laptop and kind of ship them that appropriate hardware to them. If they're looking to provision software, we'll then be able to provision, create a new Skype account or create a new Microsoft PowerPoint license for them, so on and so forth. And that's kind of a more multi-turn conversation, a more conversational flow. But what we'll see today is how we make a knowledge-based conversational and enable employees to get precise answers from kind of a back-end data source, whether that's in, again, as we saw, ServiceNow, knowledge base, or in this case, Office 365. So to jump right in, I'm going to go ahead and kind of open the assistant, and we'll showcase a few of the examples that we saw, in terms of designing a kind of a smarter NLU system. So if I say, is there a file size limit in Outlook? Great, now it's thinking, and then I'll come back with an answer, and there we go, right? So now it'll actually provide kind of a summary of an answer and then highlight, right, the answer. Is there a file size limit? Well, indeed, Outlook limits the size of files you can send. And then if I wanted to, I could now go ahead and click on View More and actually be taken to the source, right? So here's the source document. And again, you'll notice that this is opening up kind of in an inline window, which is in the context of the conversation, so we're not taken out. And the other way to think about this is this can exist wherever the employee is, right? That's one of the big pieces, kind of the big narrative with Avaamo is build once, deploy anywhere, whether that's kind of build once and tackle anything, right? So whether that's different use cases, whether that's different languages, and indeed different channels. So you can imagine that the same virtual assistant now can exist on Microsoft Teams, on Slack, if we're talking about, kind of enterprise channels. And then of course, Avaamo does offer a number of consumer-facing channels as well, Facebook, WhatsApp, so on and so forth, right? The SMS. And then kind of the other piece of the puzzle there is this can also now exist. We're seeing kind of the chat interface. It can also exist via voice, where the same virtual assistant you can talk to, right? Either via digital voice, it'll interact with us via kind of a full voice-based experience, or we can call into a phone number and have the same experience, right? conversational IVR is we like to call it a first-class citizen in our platform, where once you build a virtual assistant once, you can now deploy across many different channels, conversational IVR via the phone being one of them as well, right? So now going back to our use case, we've asked about kind of the file size limit. We get kind of a highlight of the actual answer. We can kind of dig into the source document if we wanted to. And then there's follow-on links, right? Because of the way the system is constructed and kind of the intelligence of the underlying NLU engine, we're able to now provide predictions as to what the user will want going forward, right? And indeed, if someone is asking about a file size limit, odds are they have a larger file that they're trying to attach in an email. And so now we provide kind of the next layer and offer them, reduce the size of pictures and attachments in Outlook email messages, right? Anticipating what the user is going to want going forward. That's kind of a key piece of building a smart virtual assistant, in addition to being able to improve the natural language understanding and actually providing the right answer. Right, and the last piece of the puzzle kind of in this response here is going to be the thumbs up, thumbs down. This is actually how we get feedback from the user in real time. This is part of our learning module that and Avaamo does a couple of things that are unique here. We do both unsupervised and supervised learning, and if there's interest in that, there's going to be future webinars on this topic as well. But kind of at a high level, this is part of our supervised learning methodology, where users can provide real-time input on whether or not a response was appropriate, whether they got what they wanted, or if not, whether they needed more assistance, and then they can provide kind of a message. And this is then used, right, by business analysts, by managers, so on and so forth, in our backend kind of analytics dashboard, to then be able to improve the virtual assistant over time with human in the loop training, right? So we'll go ahead and give this kind of a thumbs up, and then we'll try asking a few more things. So now if I say, is there a file size limit in Outlook? Actually, that's exactly the same thing I've just asked. Let me ask a slightly different one. We'll say, how do I upload a file? Okay, great. And so now what's happening is we're actually getting a response where we're disambiguating, right, between multiple different responses that we could ask. So the user has asked, or the employee has said, how do I upload a file, right? And in the knowledge base, in the Office 365 kind of backend source here, there's a number of different resources. We can have an answer that's related to Outlook, we can have an answer that's related to Skype, and instead of kind of saying, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that, we're actually guiding the user, right, through these options towards narrowing down, the source. So we'll go ahead and click on Outlook, and there we go. Now we get kind of a response. We have, a number of different carousel. We can kind of see more options as well. And of course, there's that card. We can click on View More. It'll open up kind of in the inline window. All of that familiar stuff from above is available. And this is how we disambiguate questions where, whereas a different system might kind of fail at this point, we kind of narrow down the scope and with that goal-driven behavior, get the user to the right response, even when there's kind of a multi-turn solution that's required. So let's ask something slightly different. If I say Skype mute mobile, now this is kind of stilted language, very, very kind of basic phrasing, right? Not a lot of information for a natural language understanding system. But again, because we've been trained using that sparse data algorithm, what we're able to do now is provide a best guess, right? And indeed, I think this is a pretty good one, where if the user says Skype mute mobile, how to mute or unmute your microphone in a Skype for Business call. Explore Skype for Business on mobile devices, mute, how to mute participants when you're kind of Skyping with someone, right? This is kind of a best guess, and indeed it does kind of answer the question that the user might have, right? And this is how we handle phrases kind of in the context of a conversation. Now let's put all of this together and give something kind of challenging here. I'm going to say, I'm struggling to use the max func in Excel. How do I use that? Okay, now before I kind of send this off, right, there's a few things that we can point out here. Right? There's spelling mistakes, right? There's abbreviations, or rather kind of truncation of of a word. Now, obviously, I mean function. The system now needs to understand that I mean function, not just func. And then, of course, I've said XL, right? So in the context of our conversation in Office 365, XL means Microsoft Excel, not extra large, right? So the system needs to be able to understand the differences there and provide the right answer, and indeed it does, right? So it kind of points us to the max function page here and provides us with a precise answer to kind of a challenging question as well. And this is pulling together a lot of information. It's finding the signal and the noise. It's dealing with syntax, grammar, all of that. And again, because the system is trained in a sparse data environment, it's now able to provide a robust answer, even when something like this will not have appeared in any training data set kind of ever exposed to the system, right? So this is kind of a looking beyond and extrapolating beyond a source data set, again, because of our focus on algorithmic intelligence and the training objective for that algorithm, right? So that at a high level is kind of an overview of how we might build a system that can understand natural language understanding in the context of the ITSM. We've seen how we can build a system to do very complex tasks based on even in use cases where we have not that much data. We've seen how we can build a deep learning model that can tackle this level of complexity and ambiguity, again, based on the approach to focusing on the algorithm, not the data, in creating a learning kind of system. And then finally, we've seen how all of this comes together, right, in kind of a robust system that provides very fast and efficient resolution to IT solutions in the context of making a knowledge-based conversational, right? There's a lot more to be said here about how to then take this and apply it to more complex use cases, of course, and then a lot more that can be said about how something like this exists and can be developed and deployed across many different channels, many different languages, but we'll leave that for a different webinar. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Manu, and of course, I think the next section is going to be some Q&A. So happy to now answer any questions that we have about what we've just seen. All right, back to you, Manu. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Abhi. And looks like we have a couple of questions here. So the first one is, how much of what you've explained is out of the box, or do we have to build these models ourselves?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think we briefly touched on this in the presentation, but essentially, right, a lot of what we're seeing today is really what's behind the scenes, right, of how to build a successful kind of NLU engine to tackle use cases in ITSM. From a practitioner's perspective, and indeed from the perspective of a kind of a client coming in, none of this is going to be what you might interact with on a day-to-day, right? So what you'll actually see when building a virtual assistant using Avaamo's platform are modular use cases, which we call enterprise skills. And so, for example, in ITSM, reset password is a use case, right? It's a skill that includes the understanding, all of the training data to understand, how a different users might say they want to reset their password and for what applications. The logic of that conversation, right? What are the steps we need to take to actually help resolve this issue for the user? And then finally, this use case or this modular skill also will include, right, the integration into a backend system, whether that's ServiceNow or some other system that we're integrating within the backend to actually help reset a user's password, right? And so these three pieces, the intent understanding, the conversation logic, and the fulfillment on the back end, all of these constitute a enterprise skill for us, and these are kind of available out of the box, right? So we have many different skills that we've built for ITSM, and the key thing I think from today's presentation is how did we get to the point where these skills can understand robust language in the context of ITSM, right? And so that's kind of the kind of focus of today's presentation, but really all of these use cases are kind of available out of the box. And you'll find kind of the spread of what you might expect, in ITSM, right? So we tackle 80 to 90% of typical ITSM use cases. And then in the case where we need to create a new use case and we're working with your organization, we've identified that there's a use case that isn't already available in our repository, then, right, all of what I've said kind of comes into play even more, where how quickly now are we able to add this new use case? How quickly are we able to onboard this new set of training data and fine tune our model to be able to understand, this and automate this new use case? That's where kind of what we talked about today is going to be helpful. I hope that helps answer some of your question.
Yeah, that was definitely helpful, Abhi. There's actually a kind of a follow-up question to that. What is the typical time to deploy? So basically, you explained, how it happens behind the scenes, but they're asking now how long it takes them once they have all of, all of that goodness.
Right, I see. Yeah, no, that's a great follow-up. And typically what we like to say, right, and again, the caveat here is going to be that it depends on the complexity of additional use cases. It depends on if what you're trying to build, we have, some version of that already, which in most cases we might. Can we rely on a pre-existing skill in our repository as a template to then build out additional use cases? Right, kind of keeping all of those factors in mind. And then of course, are there integrations with legacy systems that are, custom in-house, in which case we'd have to kind of build out those integrations. But if they're kind of standard integrations that are into the most typical ITSM systems, Salesforce, so on and so forth, then, it becomes a lot easier. But what we like to say is about 6 to 8 weeks, kind of end to end for a set of use cases to kind of go live. And this involves, right, the design process of figuring out the conversational design. This involves designing the APIs, getting the right schemas in place, integrations, user acceptance testing, testing on, with a focus group on your side, and then a larger kind of limited visibility testing. And then finally, doing kind of more training to augment the virtual assistant's capacity based on real user data, right? All of this kind of happens within the span of 6 to 8 weeks. And then once we go live, right, that's when in some ways the real work begins, right? Working with users, working with actual user data to then fine tune the approach and potentially discover new use cases. What is it that users want to do with the virtual assistant that we hadn't anticipated, right, when we first built out the virtual assistant? And so that kind of learning and growing then continues beyond the 6 to 8 weeks. But that's typically the life cycle that we experience is within that time frame.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Abhi. So that's all the questions we had. Folks, I also want to remind you that the Forrester report that we mentioned in the webinar is on the Avaamo website. So please go and check it out. Our website is www.avaamo.ai. That's AVAAMO.ai. And you should be able to find the Forrester report on there. Also, there's another webinar we did. So for those of you who are looking to implement conversational AI in IT support, we did a webinar recently on 5 ways to resolve IT tickets faster. I highly encourage you to look at that as well. And then there's also a webinar on the buyer's guide to conversational AI. So for all of you who are considering conversational AI, whether you're going to buy it or whether you're going to build it, I think that you definitely need to check out these webinars. So please take a look, and we will inform you of upcoming webinars. Thank you for attending today, and have a good holiday. Thank you.